Welcome to another Pneuma of Now podcast. This is your host, Richard Blankenship, the triple guru from Kansas, but we're not in Kansas anymore. We got a special part 2 series for you today. This is part 2 of 3 with Kelvin C. Abraham, recorded probably back in March. Okay, so we're just getting around to getting these updated, edited up, and presentable for you. But I want to intro this episode before we get Kelvin on here. Just want to read something to you. Put this little discussion, frame it for you in a little bit different way. So we want to start today with this idea that's in light of the equitriangular nature of the so-called square numbers. One wonders why, throughout mathematical history, squares have been general-purpose units of area, seemingly by default rather than by design. We've applied square pegs to nearly every shape, every hole under the mathematical sun, often ignoring units relative to holes, focusing on differences more than resonant similarities. By re-examining traditional notions of units and dimensionless constants, we can explore a new language of connected and interdependent principles and forms, revealing the deeper connections between numbers and geometries, wholeness and universal organization. Imagine a world where we express ideas in terms of relative units, such as squares, triangles, triangular or hexagonal units, depending on context. The relationship between numbers and the shapes they represent, transcending traditional distinctions of absolute areas, unearths an equivalence principle of great beauty, no longer confined to actual square geometries. The same numbers find equal resonance in equilateral triangles or hexagons, which I'd like to point out is just hexagons are 6 equilateral triangles. Okay, so even though other less regular shapes capable of tiling the plane, okay? So that's the idea. We're inspecting this idea of two-dimensional planar mass energies. Okay, we need to keep that in mind at all times, because what Tetryonics does is re-enunciate this principle. We will do it again and again and again. But by embracing this new understanding, we invite a shift in perspective, exploring the interconnectedness of numbers and space, quantity and quality, and the organization of the universe. As we embark on this journey, let us shed the limitations of our previous thinking, boldly stepping into a world of greater resonance, balance, and harmony. So we're a little bit behind schedule with this release, but we're getting it out there. Our intro today really is just going to be short and sweet, but I do want to mention that we're going to kind of start where we left off with the Hilbert and Einstein section of the discussion, where Kelvin's just going to talk to us briefly about, kind of some ideas there regarding the publishing, the race to publish, Einstein's theories, how they differ from his own, and then we move on to some very many other topics.
Einstein said, I'm working on the equation. I'm not too far away. I'll have it done very shortly. And Hilbert said, I think I can do it. I understand where he's coming from. So thus began a race that Einstein wasn't particularly aware of. Some historians will say that they're actually corresponding between themselves, and that Einstein may have grabbed the final details from Hilbert's correspondence with him. Only those two gentlemen know who got there first, but in the end, Einstein published first by not too much. So the glory goes to him for general relativity. In my book, and Einstein's always been up there, like everyone else in my mind, a great mind, and I never sought out to be anything like him or Newton. I never thought I'd write a Principia as anywhere near his, let alone 5 times bigger. I think he did science a great service and disservice at the same time. He gave us a model that Hang on, I'll disconnect again.
Oh, it's no problem. I was going to share my screen this round anyways, so go ahead.
A great service and disservice at the same time. He gave us a model that works, that allows us to fine-tune gravity, but he never explained it. He put Newton's gravitational constant into his own work, his own equation. So he never explained what gravity was. Like Newton, he said, here's an equation for gravity. It works better than Newton's, but unlike Newton, he never said, I don't explain it, its mechanism, and I frame no hypothesis. At least Newton in that respect was academically honest. Einstein just said, here's the latest equation, and never explained what his curved space-time was. And we can now see it to be just a changing energy gradient. It's a stress energy. The stress energy tensors are just energy gradients in any particular region of space. This is a circular one, or circularish one, depending on the shape of the body and the energies within it that create the electromagnetic field and the particles moving within it. But once you understand those mechanisms, you go back to more of a classical view of the universe, a clockwheel one, where you have a central star with spokes of energy radiating out, pushing on planets, keeping them in stable orbits. And you have the same thing for planets with their satellites. And if they don't have electromagnetic fields, then they have purely gravitational orbits, which makes it very easy to model using Newton's classical mechanics. Hence why Newton's work is still used to send people to the moon and everything. They don't use general relativity for that. General relativity as a niche use is good. Whereas now that we have the Tetryonic version, we can see how we can model these interactions, and we can, as you see in the cosmology ebook, I go to great lengths to explain, to develop a gravitational model that's gravity, electric, and magnetic. I show how they all interrelate, and I go to great lengths to explain the difference between mass and mass energy and matter, so that people can hopefully grasp that if you could visualize the longitudinal energy the stars put out, not the transverse waves, longitudinal ones, you could see how stars make planets spin around like they do, how they create the whirlpool vortices that Walter Russell would have described. You change the energy content of a star and the orbits will shift in. It's just like spiraling down a drain pipe if the energy decreases in the star or the planet. Increase their energies and they spiral outwards. So you can easily describe orbits as spirals. You can do all the stuff that Walter Russell describes. You can do all the stuff that many others, I won't go into all the names, they're all in the ebooks, and there's still people out there doing modified Newtonian gravity, etc. But they're all lacking one thing, and that's Tetryonics to jumpstart. I'm not beating my own chest here. I simply looked at a shape and said, what can I do with this shape? My electrical training helped in some respects, particularly with QED, but chemistry, my worst subject I abhorred, turned out to be my biggest book, because suddenly I had a new model of periodic elements that I could build engineering as an exploded model, as a constructed model that we can revisit. Diego's done a wonderful job building that in CAD for us. And along the way, it sounds like it cost him his doctoral thesis, unfortunately, because he presented it to a room of academics that couldn't grasp the models that he was showing them, even though the models explained everything right through to the macro biological structures in the DNA. They couldn't grasp that he had come up with, that he was using such a strange model. So the cognitive dissonance that occurred resulted in a big struggle for him so far as his PhD. And I get that a lot. Why aren't you teaching? Why aren't you take this to a university? I had arguments with the Dean of Mathematics in University of Queensland over what causes weightlessness in space. He was explaining it via Newton's method of creating an orbit in space. Move at the high enough speed and you'll orbit an object, create a satellite. That's not what creates weightlessness. It's the inertial frame of the velocities of the spaceship and the human, or the ball or whatever object you're throwing inside that orbiting body that creates the weight, or the microgravity, or the weightlessness. It's got nothing about how Newton gets you up there. That just gets you into an orbit. It's the velocities, the relative velocities that create weightlessness up in space. So we had this disagreement in front of a whole year's worth of intake that wanted to learn about science and mathematics. It just didn't go down well. I presented it to the University of Queensland, to their experts in quantum mechanics and all the rest, and they can't wrap their head around it. Diego struggled with professors in biology, and I suspect that will continue ad nauseum until, like not Newton, Planck said, you don't advance science in one massive bound, like jumping off a spacecraft onto the moon. It comes about by the slow, inevitable death of those in your way, the minds that can't see the new paradigm, can't understand it, or aren't willing to, because they make a living teaching what is known, what is accepted. They don't want to change it in one huge structure. So hence we're back to where we started in the initial discussion with you. What am I doing now? I'm moving away from adding more illustrations to my books, which I could do, to starting to build practical devices that will demonstrate the work, bringing new technologies, which will still have their own growth curve, because presenting a device that can transmit energy or information across any distances faster than light will immediately be unexplainable to most electrical engineers, to most modern physicists. So their natural reaction will be, well, there's some trickery involved. And it goes down the path of the culture we have out there now, with people disappearing because of new novel inventions and things like that. I may fade away and die, but at least the books are out there for free. They're on the internet. They're there for perpetuity. They're short of shutting the internet down, they can't get rid of it. So I saw even today, there's a new YouTube channel by somebody looking at my work. Whether he's on track or not, I don't know until I've watched it. But at least it's trickling out there. The inquiries are coming in, the knowledge base is growing, and the grassroots foundation is there. And that's all we need. Just general inquiry and an open skepticism about what I've printed and what I've done. But let's have that discussion and bring it on and advance it, because there's a whole paradigm shift for understanding, but there's an even greater evolution for humanity ahead when we start embracing this knowledge and start really applying it to our technologies. We'll go away from environmental problems. We'll solve a whole heap of things. Environmental problems, energy sources, how we use energy, how things work, how we travel, how we structure our information and our privacy. It's all related back down to using natural models of energy, understanding energy and how we can use it, and how nature uses it, and how we can better use it.
I have a fun question for you, because I hear people making this debate all the time. I just kind of want to hear if you have an answer, or if you're just not sure, please let me know. But the fun question is, did Nikola Tesla really say the 369 quote? Or did that come from some other place? Or does it even matter, because we see what that means now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say he actually said it. But this is my personal view, because he had the idiosyncrasy of always wanting his napkins rearranged and walking around buildings 3 times before he walked through the door. So it's obviously in his psyche as a tick, if you like, buried away in there. He probably came from something he was doing in winding coils and things like that, where he saw there's a relationship from a primary to a secondary. Who knows where it came from unless we discover his notes that says it. But there's obviously an idiosyncrasy there in the man's brain. And I have no doubt that he probably said, if he didn't say that, he would have said something like that. His ability, given that English wasn't his native language, his ability to speak and write eloquently, I admire. I mean, like I love reading his works and his essays. They are just eloquent. So I don't doubt in my own mind for a second that something like that wouldn't have come from his brain. It took me how long? Probably 9-10 years to develop my own little magnificent 369 relating the inscribed circle to the circumscribed circle to the irrational height of a equilateral triangle. But when you do, suddenly you see that it's not just 369, it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, 8, 12. The
Right.
1, 2, 3 relationship. Yeah.
Can you see that? Oh, yeah, I didn't know if you could even see that.
Yeah, I can. Yeah. Yeah. And I knew the relationship for a while. I knew that the equilateral height of a triangle, square root of 3/2, is an irrational number, which makes it interesting in its own right, because drawing an irrational number is something that mathematics can never give you a number for. But in geometry, you can draw it. You may not know to the last digit what it is, but there it is. It's just the height of an equilateral triangle. You can draw it every time. 3 lines that are the same joined together will give you the irrational number. But how to calculate that easily without invoking sine or square roots of 3, etc., was always something I thought of. Sine 30 is one thing, or sine 60 is one thing. And then one day I sat down playing around with the mathematics side of it and discovered that you got the radius of the inscribed circle is actually half of that of the circumscribed circle that Richard's pointing to now. So one is a relationship of 1 to 2 or 1 to a half. They're both the double or half of each other. So, and it's always that relationship to the inscribed to the circumscribed. And when you add those two radii together, you actually have little r plus big R equals the height of the triangle, which is something really, really profound, because then suddenly the inscribed circle could be 1, the circumscribed radius could be 2, an octave higher, but the two combined, the 1 and the 2, becomes 3, which is not an irrational number, but it's still the height of a triangle. But we know that to calculate the height of that triangle, we actually use an irrational number. So we use irrational numbers. We can show you to use an irrational number to make a rational number and vice versa. And we have 369. If you had the radius of 3, the larger radius would be 6, and the height of the triangle would be 9, 369. But equally, it could be 1, 2, 3, 2, 4, 6, all the other combinations you can think of.
Okay.
Represent that mathematical relationship with that simple diagram.
All right. Can I show you the one I found?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen this. You have to tell me.
Yeah. No, this is the one you were alluding to before. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I did it with 7 before. This is the 369 correlation where you start with 3 squared at the top. So
yeah, 9. It's all there. Yep.
So everybody understand that this is 9, which is 3 squared. And if you do the math, if you draw a diagonal between 2 and 3, you get this line here. The unit of that is 3. 3, yep. 6, 9.
9.
And you've got 6 divergent energy momenta and 3 convergent energy momenta, totaling 9 total.
369. It's a pattern that will just, and maybe this is what Newton, that Tesla was talking about. I suspect it wasn't, but it's like taking digital roots. You can find patterns in Fibonacci sequence. You can find patterns everywhere in mathematics. Mathematics is saying there is a pattern, and they're constantly searching for this pattern. Well, I think you'll find when you look at it, equilateral triangles will give you a lot of these patterns. They will pop out, like you said, 7 sitting there. Yep. 369's there. Squared numbers are not squared numbers, people. They are equilateral geometries when it comes to physics. You can still draw them as a square, but if you want to understand nature and how energy creates the universe about us and ourselves and how we work and how we can better ourselves, we have to get back to equilateral numbers. I searched for a long time for another name. Triangular numbers doesn't work because they use triangular numbers for a different pattern. Equilateral numbers works because they haven't coined it yet. Just like I use several terms, just like Tetryonics itself. I had to have a name. I could have called it foundation theory, which was a beautiful name, suits me down to the ground. But the problem is that other people have used similar names. It doesn't stand out. I needed a name for the particle of matter that nobody knew existed, which was a tetryon because it's a tetrahedral shape. So I called it Tetryonics. So it would jump out and be easily found in amongst the plethora of theories and ideas that you can find on the internet, because I knew the internet was going to continue to grow and information and misinformation was going to continue to grow. So you found an old one.
Is that okay with you?
That's cool. That's cool. There's more life than what's on this humble little rock floating around, this third rock from the planet, so to speak. And I'm a big Superman fan, so
that's what got me started. I mean, literally, Superman was an absolute obsession of mine when I was a kid. So the fact that we have that in common, the fact that I've sat in a movie theater with you to watch a movie, the fact that we've even spent 10 minutes in the same room together, let alone a weekend together, is pretty phenomenal. And I'm kind of hoping that we can do a repeat performance at some point. And so
they're always too short. It's like these discussions. It's always too short to cover the ground that I've created, the tapestry I've laid out there. I even put all the quick memes, the basic pictures that explain where I've unified things in succinct form and explanations together. And it's 3 meters long, as you know. You've got the big roll up. It's huge for a simple little quick slideshow of the key points to be 3 meters long. When rolled out, doesn't make for easy conversation, let alone saying, okay, let's have a quick discussion and we can explain all this to everyone. Yeah. It just goes and goes and goes. But that's the key one. That's the one. If you had to have that as a teaching guide, you could explain how everything works from that. All the rest of the pages in the ebooks are just me elaborating on those points. But the elaboration had to come first so they could make the key points and put them together into the one roll. But that's the key scroll, if you like, of Tetryonics. If you want to have one page summary, that'd be it. There are many one key symbols that explain bits and pieces, etc. But the one scroll that sums it up is that one.
I wanted to read you this quote. I think you may have had a chance of seeing it on my posts, but I got this from Dr. Joseph Farrell, and I think this is a paraphrase because I cannot find this quote attributed to René Descartes anywhere, but I've tried. So I think it's a paraphrase, but we see that the old geometers have made use of a kind of analysis which they extended to the solution of all problems. I'll bet they have hidden it from posterity. I well realize they must have known a kind of mathematics that was very different from today's common one. Not that I believe they knew it perfectly, and indeed some traces of this true mathematics appears to me still, albeit not from the most ancient ages, which lived many centuries before our time. I would also think that later on it was suppressed by its very authors by a certain wickedness.
Well, yeah, that resonates with me in a few things. I mean, like, René Descartes being the mastermind of modern philosophy, science, splitting away from getting permission from the Pope to split away and being granted it, so long as he didn't discuss things relating to the soul, which inherently is mass energy, versus you can describe the physical motion of bodies, that's matter, but don't describe mass energy. And the more we look and study things like the writings of Atlantis and Thoth and all the arcane sacred geometries, and you discover that the periodic table overlays on the flower of life perfectly. All this information that seems to have been lost, and the fact that we have mentally, for some reason, completely ignored the equilateral triangle till I came roaring back with it, and it all suddenly meshes back in with the physics, and particle physics is at the right time, and the internet's here, and things like that to allow us to do this. Sort of hints, and even things like archaeology, like Göbekli Tepe and things like that, hint to the fact that there's an older age. You look at the length of the Egyptian empire compared to us, and the things we still don't know about the Egyptian empire that have way outlasted our own empire and our own modern technologies. If we can survive as long as the Egyptians as a society, we'd be going well. We're nowhere near it. It all hints to the fact that, and we keep getting these little seeds thrown in, that there's greater things. And even when I started, before Tetryonics even had a name to it, I thought we'd worked pretty much everything out. I thought modern science was at the threshold. We nutted most things out. We had to just cross the T and dot the I's, to quote Lord Kelvin. But then I discovered this simple thing called an equilateral triangle and what you can do with it and how it can be related to electrical engineering, and discovered that there's a whole massive jumpstart in knowledge that we've missed, a whole quanta, a whole 6 books that we've missed, that are missing out of our teachings. We need to sit back and wonder, seriously, to entertain the thought that, given that fusion doesn't exist and the stars are 200 times more efficient at converting matter into energy than what we hypothesize with fusion, it's quite conceivable that the Earth and the stars have been around 200 times longer than we suspected, which means the time frame for humans and civilizations, given Göbekli Tepe, could have easily come and gone many times over. And as is hinted at there, we could have easily had all this information. If the internet collapsed tonight, you'd have to wonder if it'd be another 400 years, like it was with Kircher to myself, whether someone would play around with an equilateral triangle and rediscover the basics of physics and say, this is where we should be going to be an advanced society. This is how we reach the stars. This is how we create unlimited energy for our uses, and everything we want to do, how we travel, communicate, and exist as an advanced society. And it may be 400 years, it may be 4,000 years. But like it hints at in the quote, all it takes is for people to use a language, be it mathematics, or be it verbal language, or be it spheres, unit circles. Use the wrong language and you'll get some of the right results, but not quite. 369 remains hidden until you get the right key. This why gravity formulation is the same as Coulomb's charge interaction remains hidden until you have the right key and understanding. But once you have that understanding and that right model, then all of these things disappear. And there's quotes floating around out there of uniting science and religion. It's sort of undoing what Descartes did. We needed to have science as opposed to religious knowledge, which was just quoting verbosely from a scripture and adhering to it no matter what. We needed to have science to advance things and to bring about some debate and to better our lives. But now we've reached a point where religions become fractured, religions that still at a division state between science and its teachings. We need to unite everything, bring back the sacred geometry, bring back the older teachings, merge it all, put it through the washing machine that is Tetryonics, and see what comes out. I never thought the seed of life and the fire of life and the yantra and the chakra and all the rest would have any role in it. But there it is. It's all in there in the chemistry books and in the other books I've done. You can see how old teachings that have now taken on their own meaning as sacred geometries and sacred teachings from Hindu religions and from Christianity, etc., Star of David, how they all have their own purpose in science. So maybe that was the science of the Atlanteans that was lost when their island sank beneath the waves because they were so filled with hubris that God said, no, enough. Maybe this is part of what everyone was reaching for at the Tower of Babel, when we all developed different languages just to confuse the waters even more. Only people that know for sure would be God and the watchers watching over us and keeping tabs on our progress. But at the end of the day, we've rediscovered it now. It's out there. All we have to do is continue to apply it, teach it, and let it evolve. Let it take its path. It's one of the fascinating things about truths. Once you find a truth, no matter how much you want to destroy it, how much it challenges your mindset and other people's mindsets, there's no denying it. It becomes its own force and for progress and evolution and disclosure. So it'll keep pushing away at the boundaries. It'll keep redefining science. And the generations that object to it will pass away, and hopefully I'm around to see the day.
And then I want to make sure to get this quote, because I was going to open the presentation with this quote and my mind blanked. You know, you're in that moment and you're like, what is happening? But man's mind, once stretched by a new idea, never regains its original dimensions. And I've told you that quote before, but it's always true. What you've done for me is my mind will never return to a prior dimension. So I just want to thank Steve Elswick for that. And
then, well, Steve gave you the original introduction, the original opportunity to do the presentation. I just threw my hat in the ring and said, hey, I might just trundle over there anyway, just for the sheer giggles. And we got a giggle. We did when you announced that I was actually sitting in the conference at the time. So that was unexpected for them. And the questions we fielded afterward, and like it just shows that there's a genuine interest in new information out there by people. Whether they're on the fringe or whether they're mainstream doesn't matter at this stage or even at that stage. It was more about showing people what this new truth can do, where it can be applied, where I had applied it. But as I keep saying, I keep applying it. I keep finding new places to put it, new things it explains. And I keep having aha moments going, oh, I never thought of that. I have to go off and explore what this shows me. Does it show me something new? Does it show me something that I hadn't thought of before? And the biggest learning curve was figuring out Tetryonics in the first place, obviously, because I had to pull information from all sorts of places to get it to where it is now. But the books are out there. Fermi came up in my brain just before. Didn't know much about him, except he was a famous mathematician. Turned out he was actually a judge that was a part-time mathematician. And he gave the method of factoring, and what do you know? It turns out to be related to how nature creates colors in the universe, spectral line transitions. The way that the geometry can relate to things that are described in mathematics. I never found mathematics. I'm not a mathematician by any stretch. I hated math. I used it and did it like most people because it was in the school curriculum. But to me, it was just like learning German. It was a language I didn't quite grasp, and I didn't see huge potential for it, even though I became an electrical engineer in Telstra and things like that. It serves a purpose, but if they'd shown me these geometries when I was learning mathematics, quite possibly I might have been a bit more stimulated, because I think I'm more visually inclined than I am mathematically inclined. And that's a key. A lot of artists will come up with Tetryonics just from the colors and the shapes and go, wow, what do you want to do here? And then when you say it's describing nature and physics at work, they, I'm not very interested in physics. I'm more of an artist. The two aren't exclusive. They can easily work together to explain a lot of things. And in fact, I had to go, version 1 of the book was basically geometry, was the geometrics. I had to go back and add the mathematics because the mathematicians kept saying, how is this a science book? It doesn't have any math in it. How does this relate to any of this taught in quantum mechanics? So I had to go back and add the math into version 2 in order to show that it does all relate. It's all there. You've just got to take your time. Now the opposite's true. The mathematicians go, I can see the math there, but what's with the geometry? I mean, like, that's not what the geometry relates to. It's harmonic motion, unit circles, etc. And I have to explain, no, it's not. And be very forthright about it and go, you've got it wrong. Try and wrap your head around it this way. And this is where you win over me because you're more diplomatic. You're more of the ambassador. You're the one that can explain things in a controlled way. I tend to get a bit frustrated at times. And I'm willing to take on the ones that are ready to flame out all my work. I'll take them on and I'll go hell for leather at them and chip away until I prove to them that they're wrong or they run away. You will quietly persevere and in a nice, calm, collected way, just go through the steps. Whereas I tend to get riled up at times purely because it's my pet, I suppose. But I just sometimes wonder why people can't see what I find to be so inherently seeable. It's probably why there's so many illustrations, because I keep going, you can apply it this way, you can apply it that way. You can look, as this picture, that previous picture showed, you can apply it, look from left to right or top to bottom and get different answers, transverse versus longitudinal. And to date, all our radio technology is based on transverse waves. We've missed the longitudinal. There we are there. Tesla versus Hertz and Maxwell. Tesla had arguments with Hertz, went to Hertz and said, you're missing the big picture. Here's the waveform you've discovered. Here's how it works. Showed him the experiments, and Hertz went, oh, you're right. I'm going to pull my thesis. And then he was convinced by Lord Kelvin to leave his thesis where it is so that science could have progressed. But he was ready. The two couldn't get their act together. Tesla knew what his experiments were showing and what he could produce. Hertz couldn't explain them mathematically or via his experiments, and they didn't agree with each other. So they were at an impasse. But in fact, Maxwell it's the same equations for Maxwell's waves, one or the other. It's just a rotational. One is up and down versus left and right. It's the same wave, as you can see there. One pushes a charged particle up and down, makes it oscillate, which is the Maxwellian Hertzian wave. Whereas Tesla's waveform, or Dollard's work, to quote someone that's contemporary, creates an acceleration on the particle, moves it physically, creates a real emotive force, which is what Tesla spoke about, creating real horsepower at a distance. Whereas Hertz and Maxwell create vibration, oscillations, and heat, microwaves, microwave ovens. Classic example. Well, we don't want microwave ovens to transmit information long distance. If I was to throw you a rope, Richard, a ball of string, this is my best analogy, and you grab that ball of string, it would take a certain amount of time for that ball to reach you, number one. But once you grabbed it and we pulled it tight, the moment I or you tug on that rope, you feel that tug instantaneously. A physicist will say, no, you won't. It'll take whatever time it takes for the speed of light to travel down that rope, because the molecules can only vibrate at the speed of light. Well, no, it won't. Doesn't matter if I throw it to you, Richard, or throw it to Elon Musk on Mars. The moment he tugs on that rope, and if it's pulled tight, you'll feel it. And that's how the old-fashioned paper cups for string used to work. It was still it wasn't a tug and pull, but that's what kids ended up doing on it.
Still just, yeah, you're
until
still just vibrating.
it broke, but the vibrations would travel longitudinally, transversely down the spoken words would travel transversely down the taut string. But equally, you could pull on that cup back and forth. And if they both knew Morse code, they could transmit the information faster and louder than they ever could by speaking into the cup.
Well, one more time, I just wanted to thank Kelvin C. Abraham for joining me on the podcast. Remember, we do have a part 3 of this particular interview. And then after that, we're going to be diving really deep. So be looking for that in the next week or two. I want to thank all the subscribers, everybody for listening, and any questions that you have, feel free, because we welcome you to a new era in scientific understanding. As always, we leave you with one thought and one thought alone: deep peace in the Pneuma of now.